Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Unit 8, Notes 2-2. So this is our second to last note sheet of the week. We'll have one tomorrow as well. So I like to start out every note sheet with just kind of bringing us back to that simplifying radical stuff since we do it in every unit. All right, so first of all, let's take a look at 180. Remember, something ends in a 0. You can always split it as something in 10. So we're going to do 18 and 10. So then 18 we can break down to 9 and 2, 10, 5 and 2. Last but not least, we can break down this 9 into a pair of 3s. So let's go ahead and write out what we have. Okay, if you're at the point where you can recognize pairs without writing it out underneath the radical, that's fine. But if you're still struggling to find those pairs, make sure you still write it out underneath the radical. So I have a pair of 2s and a pair of 3s. So I bring both of those to the outside. So 2 times 3 is 6. And then we have square root of 5. Okay, so your answer there is 6 square root of 5. Taking a look at number 2, if you remember with number 2, first thing we're going to do is we're going to simplify both of those radicals. Okay, so what I want you to do is I want you to go ahead, pause the video, and simplify those radicals, and then you'll be able to check your answer here in a second. Okay, so if you had done it correctly, you should have ended up with the answer 9/11 as your fraction. So if you didn't check, see what went wrong. And then once you're done with that, I'm going to go ahead and have you guys do number 3 entirely on your own. Okay, let's take a look at number 4. So number 4, now bring us back to that adding and subtracting radicals. Now to add and subtract radicals, you need to only add the radicals that are the same. So for example, 3 square root of 3 and negative 7 square root of 3, those can be added together. I'll keep the square root of 3 the same and add those two numbers. So I end up with negative 4 square root of 3 and then square root of 2 plus 4 square root of 2. And then we're left with plus 5 square root of 2. Okay, so that's really just like combining like terms. You've done that before. So go ahead and try number 5 on your own. Make sure you simplify any leftover radicals and so forth. Okay, let's take a look at number 6 here. Now, number 6 is one that has been tripping us up the past couple of days. So the first thing I'm going to do is break down that radical and find my pairs. So I noticed that I found a pair of 3s. But remember, I have a 6 on that original radical. So I need to go ahead and multiply that. So what I really have here for this radical is I have 6, and then underneath the radical, 3 times 3 times 3. Well, I'm going to pull a pair of 3s out. Then I end up with 6 times 3, and that gives me 3. 6 times 3 is 18. So for that first radical, I have 18 square root of 3. Next, I'm going to break down this 12 a little bit. So this 12 I can break down to 4 and 3 and 2 and 2. So then don't forget that 8 when you write out your next radical. So I have 2 times 2 times 3. Again, we're going to be pulling out a pair of 2s, so then I end up having 8 times 2. Again, you really don't want to forget that coefficient on the outside. Well, 8 times 2 is going to give you 16. So then I have 16 square root of 3. Last but not least, I need to simplify this radical. So let's do that over here. So I have 2 square root of 75. Well, 75 I can break down to 25 and 3, 5 and 5. So then I end up having 2, 3 times 5 times 5. I'm going to take out a pair. Then on the outside, I have 2 times 5, radical 3, and then I get 15, radical 3. So that is also going to be part of my addition problem. Now, once I have it fully simplified, then I can go ahead and add these. So I have 18 plus 16, then plus 15. Okay, so why don't you go ahead and add those last ones together for me, okay? And I'm going to have you see what you get. Oh, 2 times 5 is 10, by the way. Good one, Miss Humbert. Okay, so that should be a 10 there. So go ahead and add those up for me. All right, let's take a look at multiplying rational expressions, okay? So go ahead and pause the video if you need more time to get this written down. So for multiplying rational expressions, you first need to multiply the outside radical. Okay, so outside of the radical, sometimes we look at those as coefficients. So you need to multiply outside of the radical. Then the next thing you need to do is multiply underneath the radical. Okay, so multiply those numbers that are left underneath the radical, and then you want to simplify what's left over. You're not completely done with the answer until you've simplified your answer. Okay, so if you leave a pair underneath the radical, that is not the right answer. Okay, just remember that you can't combine like terms when you're adding. So this is talking about addition. So when you're adding, you have to have the same number underneath the radical. But when you're multiplying, you don't. You can actually multiply those numbers underneath the radical. So let's go ahead and take a peek at some problems like these. So let's take a look at this one. So step 1 is to multiply outside of the radical. Outside of the radical, we just have 1 times 1, which is just 1. Step 2, multiply underneath the radical. So then I'm going to take 2 times 5. Outside multiplies with outside. Inside multiplies with inside. 2 times 5 gives us 10. So then we're just left with the square root of 10. The last thing you want to check is you need to ask yourself, okay, can I simplify that down anymore? Okay, can I simplify 10 for pairs? And no, you can't. Okay, so if you were to look at what goes into 10, you just have 2 and 5. Both those are prime numbers, so there's no pairs. So this right here is your fully simplified answer. Let's go ahead and take a look at number 8. Now number 8, what we actually have to do is multiply outside first. So we actually have to do that step. So the first thing I'm going to do is multiply those outside numbers. I'm going to take 4 times 6, and that's going to give me 24. Next thing I want to do is write my radical, and then I'm going to multiply what's underneath the radical. So I'm going to multiply 3 times 2, and that's going to give me 6. So now I need to check to make sure that I can't simplify down this radical anymore. Okay, we don't have to worry about breaking down pairs for that 24 because it's not inside of a radical. However, 6 is. Okay, so we just need to check to see if we can simplify 6 down anymore. So I have 2 and 3. Well, those are both prime numbers. I'm not going to have any pairs. So 24 square root of 6 is our final answer on that one. Okay, let's take a look at number 9. So number 9, we're actually multiplying 3 terms together. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply those outside numbers. Remember, this is the same as there being a 1. So I have 2 times 1 times 4. That's going to give me 18 on the outside. Next, I need to multiply underneath the square root. So 3 times 2 times 3. Well, 3 times 2 times 3 gives me 18. So right now what I have, oops, this should be 8, not 18. What I have is 8 square root of 18. Okay, the 8 comes from the 2 times the 4, and then the square root of 18 is underneath. So the next thing we need to do is simplify this square root of 18. So I'll break that down to 9 and 2, and 3 and 3. So now what I have is 8 square root of 2 times 3 times 3. Pull out a pair. When I do that, I'm left with 8 times 3 on the outside, and then square root of 2. 8 times 3 is 24, and then we have radical 2. Okay, so 24 square root of 2. I want you to go ahead and try number 10 on your own. Remember, multiply outside first, write your radical, then multiply the inside, then simplify. Those are the steps you're going to go through. I also want you to go ahead and try number 11 on your own. Same deal. Remember, if there's no coefficient, the coefficient is 1. Multiply those numbers on the outside, then multiply underneath the radical. Now, let's take a look at number 12, because something interesting is going to happen with number 12. So first, we need to multiply the coefficients. So we have negative 3 times 1, which is negative 3. And then we're going to multiply underneath the radical. So I have 18 times 2, which gives me 36. Well, hopefully you guys are looking at that and thinking, hey, 36, I know something about 36. That 6 and 6 multiply to 36. So you could actually take the square root of 36. Okay, so then you're going to get 6 times 6. 2, 3, 2, 3. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to write that underneath our radical. 2 times 2 times 3 times 3. Pull out pairs. And get through negative 3. Now, if you notice, everything is taken up into a pair. Because everything's taken up into a pair, then we can go ahead and we're just going to multiply, and we're not going to have a radical left over. So I'm going to have negative 3 times 2 times 3, which is going to give me a negative 18 for my final answer on that one. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at number 13 next. Okay, so let's take a look at number 13. So now we're going to throw in some variables. Still going to follow the same steps. The only thing you need to remember for this is when you multiply like bases, you need to add exponents. Okay, when you multiply like bases, you need to add exponents. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little 1 on that x so I remember that's there. Now I notice there's no numbers on the outside, so I don't have to worry about multiplying those. So the first thing I'm going to do is just write my radical, and I'm going to take 20 times 6. 20 times 6 gives me 120. And then when I take x cubed times x squared, I'm going to add those exponents to get x to the third. So let's go ahead and simplify that down some more. Okay, so again, when we're doing 120, you want to break that down into 12 and 10. I like to do that just because then it's that 0. When I see that 0, I know I can do that. So I'm going to break this down to 12 and 10. 12 breaks down to 4 and 3, 2 and 2, 5, or 10 breaks down to 5 and 2. Okay, so then when you're looking through that, underneath your radical, you're going to have a pair of 2's. None of those have pairs. So those actually all have to stay underneath the radical. But let's just write that out quickly just to make sure we got it. Because we also have 3 x's we need to find pairs for. So there's going to be 1 pair of x's. Okay, so next, let's go ahead and we're going to take out those pairs. So we have 2. And then we also have x. So we have 2 times 3 times 5. That's going to actually give us 30. And then we still have that x underneath the radical, so we have 30x. So this right here is our final answer once you've multiplied those together. I'm going to go ahead and have you try 14 on your own. Now, I know there's that number out front, but you're used to dealing with that. All you're going to do is multiply the outside coefficients, then multiply on the inside, and then simplify. So remember, when you're multiplying things of like bases, you want to add the exponents. Okay, so when you're multiplying things of like bases, you want to add the exponents. Next, let's take a look at number 15 together. So for number 15, you're going to multiply those outsides, negative 3 times 6, and that's going to give you a negative 18. Next, we're going to multiply underneath the radical. Now, don't get tripped up into thinking that you can multiply the m and the r and give them the same exponent, because they're different things. So we can't change the exponent of those things. So 7 times 21, that is going to give us 147. And then this m cubed is going to stay the same, as well as the r squared is going to stay the same. All right, and the reason for that is that they aren't like bases, so we can't add the exponents. So taking a look at 147, that's going to break down to 49 and 3 and 7 and 7. So if we write that out, we have 3 times 7 times 7, and then we have 3 m's and 2 r's. So we're going to go ahead and find pairs, and we're going to pull them out. So ultimately on the outside, we're going to have negative 18 times 7, and that's going to give us a negative 126. We have a pair of m's and we have a pair of r's. So left underneath the radical, we have a 3 and an m. So this right here is our final answer for that one. Let's take a look at number 16. So this one is just using the distributive property. It's not anything really that new. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to take the square root of 3 and multiply it to each thing. So I'm going to take the square root of 3 times the square root of 5 minus the square root of 3 times 4. So first, remember, you always multiply things underneath the radical with things underneath the radical. Next, things outside the radical or things outside the radical, okay? So here we're going to multiply 3 times 5. That's going to give us the square root of 15 minus. Now, I'm not going to multiply these 3 and the 4. One's in the radical, one's outside the radical. They cannot associate with each other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this 4 to the outside of the radical, and then I'm going to leave that square root of 3. The last thing we need to check is if any of those simplify down. Well, 15 breaks down to 5 and 3. Those are both primes, so this is as simplified as it gets. For right now, I don't really care what order you write it in, but I do care that once you multiply, you check to make sure that your leftover answers cannot be simplified or combined. I'm going to go ahead and get you started on number 17, and then you're going to simplify it out, and then finish with number 18. So we're going to take this times this and this times this. We're distributing that in. So negative 3 square root of 3 times that 2, and negative 3 square root of 3 times that square root of 6. So this 2 is multiplied here, and we get that. And this square root of 6 is going to be multiplied by the square root of 3, so then we get the square root of 18. So what I'd like you to do right now is would like you to simplify down that 18, okay, and then go ahead, combine your like terms. And then I also want you to do number 18, show me your completed note sheet when you're done. Thanks for listening.